Professor Thalnix stood at the front of the lecture hall, his 8 limbs gesturing slowly as he activated the holographic display. The massive screen flickered to life, showing a rotating simulation of an environment that made most students in the room physically recoil. Red warning markers dotted the terrain. Temperature readings fluctuated wildly. Hazard symbols covered nearly every surface. "This is your final examination," the professor said, his translator rendering his speech into various languages for the diverse student body. "Extreme Survival 101 has prepared you for this moment. 3 days. 72 hours. You will enter this simulation and face conditions that represent the most hostile environments our galaxy has documented." In the third row, Ryan Foster leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. The human cadet had brown hair that stuck up slightly in the back, no matter how much he tried to flatten it. He wore the standard academy jumpsuit, though his was more worn than most. His boots were scuffed from actual use rather than just walking between climate-controlled buildings. Next to him, Katie Mills squinted at the display. She had pulled her blonde hair into a practical ponytail that morning, the same way she had every morning since arriving at the academy 6 months ago. Her fingers drummed against her data pad, but not from nervousness. She was already calculating distances and elevation changes on the terrain map. Tom Bradley sat on Ryan's other side, his dark eyes scanning the environmental readings with the calm focus that his instructors often mistook for boredom. He had grown up in a place where you learned to read weather patterns before you learned to read books. The simulation statistics did not impress him. Around them, the alien students were having very different reactions. A Crother named Belthar, whose species boasted armored exoskeletons that could withstand direct plasma fire, made a low grinding sound that his translator marked as distress. His 4 eyes fixed on the temperature variance readings. -40 to +60 degrees Celsius. His joints would seize up in that cold. His internal systems would struggle in that heat. 3 rows ahead, a Venlathi student dimmed from bright blue to almost gray. The gaseous being floated lower in their containment suit, compression increasing as their anxiety rose. Their species had evolved in stable atmospheric conditions. Variables like these were not just challenging. They were existential threats. The Yithran, reptilian beings from a warm, humid world, had already begun accessing their datapads. 2 of them were openly viewing the withdrawal forms. A third had their claw hovering over the emergency contact button for their family pod. Professor Thalnix continued his briefing. The simulation includes multiple hazard categories. Atmospheric toxicity will require breathing apparatus at all times. Terrain stability is compromised throughout the zone, with seismic activity programmed at random intervals. Water sources are contaminated and will require purification. Native fauna has been simulated based on apex predators from Class 9 through Class 12 Deathworlds. Ryan felt Tom elbow him gently. Class 12. That's what they rated Earth, right? Yeah, Ryan whispered back. Same as our planet. Katie leaned over. So they are testing everyone else on conditions that are normal for us? Seems like it, Ryan said, trying to keep his voice neutral. He did not want to sound arrogant. It was not the aliens' fault that they had evolved on gentler worlds. Professor Thalnix's voice grew more serious. You will need to locate 3 supply caches distributed across a 50-kilometer zone. Each cache contains materials necessary for the next phase of the simulation. Failure to retrieve all 3 will result in automatic disqualification. You must return to the extraction point within the 72-hour window. Emergency beacons are available if you need immediate evacuation, but activating one constitutes a failure of the examination. The hologram zoomed in on specific terrain features. Acidic marshlands bubbled with vapor. Rocky cliffs showed fracture lines from tectonic stress. Dense fog obscured visibility in the lowland regions. Exposed ridgelines offered no shelter from the temperature extremes. In the 40 cycles I have taught this course, Thalnix said, the average completion rate is 27%. Most students withdraw before the second day. This is not a reflection of weakness. This simulation tests the absolute limits of survivability. It is designed to push you beyond what your species evolved to handle. Ryan looked at the terrain again. The marshlands reminded him of the wetlands behind his grandmother's property in Louisiana. He had spent weeks every summer exploring those swamps. The acidic vapor was new, sure, but the basic navigation principles would be the same. Stay on solid ground. Test before you step. Watch for movement in the water. The cliffs looked similar to the rock faces he had climbed in Utah. Steeper maybe. But nothing that would require advanced equipment. The basics would work. 3 points of contact. Test your handholds. Don't look down if it makes you dizzy. The temperature swings were actually less extreme than the desert where his uncle lived. In summer, that place hit 50 degrees during the day and dropped to 5 at night. You just dressed in layers and stayed aware of your body's signals. Katie was thinking along similar lines. She had grown up in northern Canada, where winter temperatures regularly dropped below -40. Her family had a cabin with no electricity. You learned to manage cold or you did not survive childhood. The simulation's -40 did not frighten her. It was just winter. Tom had spent his teenage years hiking through every terrain type his home region offered. Mountains, forests, wetlands, deserts. His parents believed cities made people soft. They had raised him to be comfortable in nature, not afraid of it. The simulation looked like a challenging hike. Nothing more. Around them, students began talking in urgent tones. The Crother were discussing equipment modifications. The Venlathi were calculating energy reserves. The Yithrin had given up on calculations and were now openly debating withdrawal. A crystalline Chev student in the front row was already packing their materials, clearly having decided the risk was too high. Professor Thalnix raised a limb for silence. You have 6 hours to prepare. Gather your equipment. Review your training. Make your decision about whether to proceed. The simulation begins at dawn cycle tomorrow. Those who withdraw will receive alternative assessment options, though these will not carry the same academic weight. Dismissed. The lecture hall erupted into motion. Students rushed toward the exits, already talking about gear checks and strategy sessions. Study groups formed instantly. Emergency preparation protocols were accessed on dozens of data pads simultaneously. Ryan stood up slowly and stretched. Katie gathered her materials without hurry. Tom checked his datapad for the cafeteria schedule. So, Ryan said, you two ready for this? Katie shrugged. It is 3 days outdoors. I have done longer. Same, Tom said. Remember that week-long trek we did in training? This is basically the same thing but with slightly worse weather. They walked toward the exit while other students rushed past them. A Quarren, a species with multiple sensory organs designed for stable environments, nearly knocked into Ryan in their haste. The being muttered an apology through their translator and kept moving. Should we study? Katie asked. Ryan considered this. What would we study? How to walk in weather. How to drink water. Fair point, Tom said. I'm hungry though. Want to grab lunch? They headed toward the cafeteria while the rest of the academy descended into organized chaos. Behind them, they could hear Professor Thalnix speaking with another instructor. The words withdrawal rate and expected failures drifted through the hallway. None of the humans noticed the way other species watched them walk calmly away. None of them realized that their lack of concern was being interpreted as either supreme confidence or dangerous ignorance. They just knew that in 24 hours they would go camping for 3 days. And that sounded perfectly fine. The simulation materialized them at dawn. 23 students from 8 different species appeared in a scattered pattern across the starting zone. The temperature reading on Ryan's wrist display showed -37 degrees Celsius. Wind cut across the open terrain at 40 kilometers per hour. Visibility extended maybe 200 meters before fog and blowing ice crystals obscured everything. Within the first 10 minutes, 2 students activated their emergency beacons. Their translucent forms shimmered and vanished as the extraction protocol pulled them out. One was a Yithrin who had started shaking violently the moment cold air hit their breathing apparatus. The other was a Venlathi whose containment suit began forming ice crystals on the exterior surface. Ryan pulled off his outer insulation layer and tied it around his waist. Underneath, he wore a thermal shirt and standard utility jacket. Anyone else warm? He asked. Katie had already removed her heavy coat. She wore a long-sleeve base layer and a vest. It is not that cold, she said, her breath forming small clouds in the air. Maybe -40 with wind chill. I walked to school in worse than this. Tom kept his jacket on but unzipped it halfway. Give it an hour. We will warm up once we start moving. 50 meters away, a group of Crother had formed a tight cluster. Their armored bodies pressed together, trying to share heat. Their species had evolved on a desert world where temperature variation meant the difference between 40 and 50 degrees. This kind of cold made their joints move slowly like machinery without proper lubrication. A Quarren student named Shelvar approached the humans. She had 6 eyes arranged around her oval head, each one protected by thick membranes against the wind. Her species came from a world with stable atmospheric conditions and gentle seasons. How are you not freezing? She asked, her translator crackling slightly in the cold air. This is freezing? Ryan said, then caught himself. Sorry? I mean, this is cold, yeah. But not too bad. Your suit has thermal regulators, right? Yes, but they are already at maximum output, Shelvar said. Her breathing apparatus fogged with each word. My core temperature is dropping despite the heating elements. Katie stepped closer, examining the Corrin's equipment. Your suit is too tight. It is compressing the insulation layer. See here? She pointed to where the fabric pulled taut across Shelvar's torso. Loosen these straps. You need air gaps for the insulation to work properly. Shelvar made the adjustments with trembling manipulator limbs. Within minutes, her shaking decreased. How did you know that? She asked. Winter camping, Katie said simply. Tight clothes feel warmer but actually make you colder. You need the air pockets. The first objective marker appeared on everyone's display. The supply cache was located 12 kilometers northeast, across terrain that the map marked as marshland. The temperature was already rising as simulated sunlight increased. By the time they had walked 3 kilometers, it had climbed to -10 degrees. Most species were still bundled in full protective gear. The humans had stripped down to base layers. Tom had rolled up his sleeves. The marshland appeared gradually. Solid ground became spongy. Water seeped up through moss and strange vegetation. The air developed a sharp, acrid smell. Warning indicators flashed on everyone's displays. Atmospheric analysis showed acidic compounds in the vapor rising from the pools of water. A crother named Dorval stopped at the edge of the marsh. His armor could withstand plasma weapons, but acid was different. Acid seeped into joints and corroded from the inside. We need to find a way around, he announced. Around is 40 kilometers, his companion pointed out, checking the terrain map. We will never make the time requirement. Ryan had walked ahead while they were debating. He found a stick, dipped it in the water, and watched what happened. The wood darkened slightly. After 30 seconds, he pulled it out and examined it closely. Some surface degradation, but nothing dramatic. It is not that strong, he called back. Maybe pH 4 or 5. Like orange juice or vinegar. Orange juice. Dorval repeated. You measure acid in food terms? We eat acidic stuff all the time, Tom explained, joining Ryan at the water's edge. He tested the depth with his stick. This looks maybe knee-deep. Could be deeper in spots. Katie was already checking her boot seals. The equipment is rated for chemical exposure. It should hold up fine for a quick crossing. The 3 humans waded in without further discussion. The water was cold but not unbearable. It smelled bad, like rotten eggs mixed with metal. The vapor made their eyes water slightly. But they had all swum in lakes with algae blooms that smelled worse. They had all hiked through areas with volcanic gases. Behind them, the alien students stood frozen with indecision. Shelvar was the first to follow. She stepped into the water carefully, her breathing apparatus filtering out the worst of the fumes. The humans were already halfway across, moving steadily through the muck. They are insane, one of the crother muttered. Or we are too cautious, Dorval replied. He watched as Katie stopped to help Shelvar navigate around a deeper section. The human was waist-deep in water that would etch his armor plating, and she was acting like she was helping someone cross a stream in a park. Dorval made a decision. If the Deathworlders can survive it, our armor can handle it. Move in pairs. Watch each other for any signs of acid penetration. The crother began crossing. Their movement was slow and deliberate, but they moved. By midday, the temperature had swung to 55 degrees Celsius. Most species activated their cooling systems and found shelter under rock overhangs or in the shadows of the strange crystalline formations that dotted the landscape. The simulation had entered the hot phase, and staying out in the direct heat was dangerous for species evolved in more moderate climates. The humans found a shady spot and sat down. They drank water from their supplies and ate energy bars. The heat was uncomfortable but manageable. Ryan had spent a summer working on a ranch in Texas where the temperature regularly exceeded 45 degrees. This was hotter but not by much. Tom poured a small amount of water on his cloth and wiped his face and neck. This is actually nice, he said. Better than the cold. I prefer the cold, Katie said. But this is fine. 3 Corrin students had followed them to the shaded area. They looked exhausted despite their environmental suits doing most of the temperature regulation work. How are you still moving? One of them asked. We are just sitting, Ryan pointed out. Yes, but you crossed the marsh. You have been walking for 6 hours. You are not using emergency water rations or heat medication. You are acting like this is easy. Ryan did not know how to explain that it was not easy exactly, but it was not extraordinary either. Humans had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them in dozens of different ways. You learned to handle temperature swings or you did not survive childhood in most regions. You learned to deal with discomfort or you never left your climate-controlled city. Katie tried to explain. Our planet has environments like this naturally. Deserts that are hot during the day and freezing at night. Swamps with acidic water and toxic plants. We grew up learning to handle these things. Your entire planet is a death world, one of the Korans said quietly. We studied this in xenobiology. Earth is rated class 12. That is the same rating as the most hostile planets in known space. I guess so, Tom said. We just call it home. A Crother approached their resting spot. It was Dorval, his armor showing minor discoloration from the acid water but otherwise intact. The human Katie, he said formally. You helped Shelvar with her equipment. And you gave advice about crossing the marsh. Why? Katie looked confused by the question. Because she needed help? But this is an examination. We are being graded individually. Helping others does not benefit your score. Okay, Katie said slowly. But she needed help. So I helped. Dorval was silent for a long moment. In his culture, competition was honorable. Cooperation was for family units only. But he had watched these humans help multiple students today. They had shared knowledge about temperature management, about navigating terrain, about equipment maintenance. They had done it without thinking, as naturally as breathing. Your species is strange, he finally said. Ryan laughed. We get that a lot. The afternoon continued. The temperature remained brutal for most species but tolerable for the humans. They helped a crystalline Chev student find a path through terrain that was too rough for their fragile structure. They showed a Venlathi how to use terrain features to block wind that was destabilizing their containment suit. By evening, when the temperature began dropping again, 9 students had withdrawn from the simulation. 14 remained. 3 of them were human. The other 11 had all received help from those 3 at some point during the day. Professor Thalnix watched from the control center, his 8 limbs moving in patterns that indicated deep thought. The simulation was performing exactly as designed. The environmental conditions were pushing students to their limits. But the humans were not being pushed. They were walking through conditions that should have been overwhelming, and they were teaching others how to do the same. This was not in the simulation design. This was not in any of his academic models. This was something new. The second day began with screaming. Ryan woke to the sound of a Koran student's distress call echoing across the simulation zone. He was on his feet immediately, grabbing his gear. Katie and Tom were already moving, their movements quick but controlled. Years of camping in places with real predators had taught them to wake up fast and stay calm. The predators had been released at dawn. The simulation called them Apex-class hunter constructs. They were 6-limbed creatures that moved like liquid shadow, with optical camouflage that made them nearly invisible against any background. Their sensors could detect heat signatures from 100 meters away. Their behavioral programming was based on predator species from a dozen different death worlds. The Koran student who had screamed was named Pelnoth. He had separated from his group to scout ahead, and now one of the creatures circled him slowly. Its camouflage flickered as it moved, giving brief glimpses of scaled hide and too many teeth. Pelnoth held perfectly still, his 6 eyes wide with terror. Tom reached the scene first. He did not run at the predator or shout. Instead, he picked up a rock and threw it hard to the creature's left side. The rock clattered against the ground. The predator's head snapped toward the sound. Its camouflage rippled with confusion. Ryan moved in from the right, making himself visible but not threatening. He clapped his hands sharply. The sound echoed. The predator turned again, its targeting sensors overwhelmed by stimuli from multiple directions. Katie appeared behind Pelnoth and grabbed his arm. Walk backward slowly, she whispered. Do not run. Just back away. The predator's programming struggled. Multiple targets. Multiple sounds. Its algorithm was designed to track single prey that either fled or fought. This was neither. Tom threw another rock, this time to the right. Ryan clapped again, moving to a new position. The predator's camouflage flickered more rapidly, a sign its systems were straining. It made a decision and lunged toward Ryan. But Ryan had already sidestepped, and the creature found itself facing empty ground. By the time it recalibrated, all 4 beings had moved beyond its immediate attack range. Keep moving, Tom said calmly. They have to reset their hunt pattern when they lose sight of prey. They walked back to camp in a loose group. Pelnotha's breathing was rapid, his translator emitting small gasps. How did you do that? He finally asked. The briefing said these predators are based on apex species. They should be unstoppable. Nothing is unstoppable, Katie said. She was scanning the terrain for more threats. Everything has patterns. Everything has weaknesses. By mid-morning, 3 more students had activated their emergency beacons. The predators were effective. They hunted in pairs, coordinated their attacks, and their camouflage made them nearly impossible to see before they struck. One Yithrin had been cornered against a cliff face. A crystalline Shev had been separated from their group and surrounded. A Venlothi had panicked when their sensors detected a heat signature moving through their camp. The remaining 11 students naturally gravitated toward the humans. Dorval, the Crother who had questioned Katie the previous day, found them around noon. His armor showed scratch marks from a predator encounter. They attacked our group, he said. We fought them off, but one of my companions was injured. Not seriously, but enough to withdraw. Fighting them is hard, Ryan said. He was crouched in the dirt, drawing patterns with a stick. They are fast and they coordinate. But they follow programming. Watch. He sketched out movement patterns he had observed. The predators hunted in pairs. One would circle to cut off escape routes while the other approached from the front. They relied on their camouflage for the initial approach, then used speed for the strike. Their heat sensors were excellent, but they could be confused by multiple heat sources or sudden temperature changes. They are predators, Tom explained. Back on Earth we have lions, wolves, bears, crocodiles. Big animals that hunt in different ways. You survive by understanding how they think. How they think. Dorval repeated. They are simulation constructs. They do not think. Their programming thinks for them, Katie corrected. Same principle. They follow patterns. If you understand the pattern, you can break it. She demonstrated using rocks and sticks as visual aids. Predators on Earth prefer easy targets. Sick animals, young animals, separated animals. They avoid anything that might hurt them because injury means death. So you make yourself difficult. You make noise. You look big. You never run because that triggers their chase instinct. Shelvar, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. But these are not Earth predators. They are from multiple death worlds. Same principles apply, Ryan said. My grandfather used to say that if it hunts, it has to conserve energy. That means it looks for easy meals. You make yourself hard to catch, most predators will look elsewhere. Throughout the afternoon the group grew. The 3 humans became unofficial teachers, showing alien students techniques that seemed obvious to them but were revolutionary to species that had never evolved alongside apex predators. They taught them to move in groups with everyone facing outward. They demonstrated how to use terrain to limit approach angles. They showed them how to create noise perimeters using rocks and branches that would alert them to movement. They explained the concept of a watch rotation so someone was always alert. A young Crother named Velnix was caught alone near a water source. 2 predators had him cornered. The humans arrived with 4 other students, all moving together and making coordinated noise. The predators saw a group of 7 instead of one isolated target. Their programming calculated the risk versus reward. They disengaged and moved to find easier prey. That is not fighting, Velnix said, clearly amazed. That is not even running. You just walked toward them and they left. Predators are not brave, Tom said. They are efficient. We made ourselves inefficient targets. By late afternoon, the humans had found a defensible position for camp. It was a natural clearing with rock formations on 2 sides, limiting the directions predators could approach. They had clear sight lines in all directions. Water was nearby but not so close that it would attract other creatures. Katie showed the group how to build a fire using materials from the simulation environment. Most species had never seen fire created without technology. They watched as she used friction and dry plant material to create smoke, then carefully nurtured a small flame into a steady fire. Fire is a tool, she explained. Most predators avoid it naturally. The light also ruins their camouflage advantage. The fire grew. 7 students from 4 different species gathered around it. The humans had shared their ration supplies, showing how to efficiently distribute food and water. They had set up a perimeter warning system using arranged stones and branches that would make noise if disturbed. Dorval sat across from Ryan, his armored form reflecting the firelight. On my world we do not have predators like you describe. We are the largest species. Nothing hunts us. Must be nice, Ryan said. But it means we never learned these skills, Dorval continued. We never needed to understand hunters because we never had to survive them. Your species did. Yeah, Ryan agreed. Earth has a lot of things that want to eat you. You learn young or you do not survive long. Shelvar was helping Tom reinforce the perimeter. Her movements were more confident now, less hesitant. "The Quarren have a saying," she said. "The soft wind does not prepare you for the storm. I think Earth gave your species many storms." "Every day," Tom said with a slight smile. "Still does." The night settled in. The temperature dropped again, but the fire provided warmth. The predators prowled the perimeter twice, their heat signatures visible on sensors. Each time they approached, saw the fire and the group students, and moved on to search for easier targets. Katie took the first watch. She sat with her back to the fire, eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond the light. Velnix sat nearby, learning how to watch and listen for threats. "Why do you help us?" the young Crother asked. "This is a test. We are competing for grades." Katie thought about this for a moment. "Where I come from, winter can kill you. My grandmother taught me that you survive winter by helping your neighbors. Because next time you might be the one who needs help. But this is not winter. This is a simulation." "Does not matter," Katie said. "You needed help. So we helped." Velnix was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your species is very strange. But I am grateful you are strange." Around the fire, students from worlds that had never known predators or harsh weather learned lessons that humans had carried for thousands of generations. They learned that survival was not about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being smart enough to understand danger and kind enough to share that knowledge. Professor Thalnix watched the camp from the control center. His data showed something unprecedented. 0 withdrawals from the human-led group in the past 12 hours. The predators were performing exactly as programmed. But the humans had turned a survival test into a teaching opportunity. He made a note in his research file. Hypothesis: Deathworld species do not just survive danger. They systematize survival and transmit it culturally. This is not individual resilience. This is collective adaptation. The fire burned through the night. The humans rotated watch shifts, teaching others how to stay alert without exhausting themselves. The predators eventually moved to other parts of the simulation zone, seeking prey that did not travel in coordinated, educated groups. By morning, the camp had become something the simulation had never anticipated. It had become a community. The ground began shaking at exactly 600 hours on the third day. Ryan woke to the sensation of Earth moving beneath his sleeping mat, a feeling he recognized from childhood earthquakes in California. He rolled to his side and calmly checked that his gear was secure. Around him, the alien students were already panicking. Shelvar's 6 eyes were wide with terror as the ground bucked and shifted. Her translator emitted high-pitched distress sounds. Dorval and the other Crother had locked their armored bodies in defensive positions, instinct overriding logic. Velnix was trying to run, which was the worst possible response during an earthquake. "Everyone stop moving," Katie called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. She was already on her feet, balanced and steady despite the ground rolling beneath her. "Find stable ground and stay low. Do not run." Tom was gathering the gear methodically, his movements practiced. "This is maybe a 5 or 6 on the scale," he said to Ryan. "Not too bad." "Yeah, decent shaking but nothing extreme," Ryan agreed. He moved toward Velnix and grabbed the young Crother's arm. "Stop. Running during an earthquake is how you fall into a crack or get hit by falling rocks. Just crouch and wait." The shaking lasted 40 seconds. As it subsided, warning indicators flashed on everyone's displays. Terrain stability compromised. Multiple fissures detected. Toxic gas releases in sectors 4 through 7. Temperature regulation system stressed. 3 students activated their emergency beacons immediately. A Venlathi whose containment suit had cracked during the shaking. A Quarren who had been thrown against rocks and injured their leg. A Shev whose crystalline structure had fractured from the vibrations. 8 students remained. 3 humans and 5 aliens who had stayed with them since the previous day. New fissures had opened across the terrain. From several of them, greenish gas was rising in thick columns. Ryan's sensor array analyzed it automatically. Carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, trace amounts of chlorine. Heavier than air, which meant it would pool in low areas and valleys. "We need to move to higher ground," Katie said, checking the topographic map on her display. "The gas will sink. We stay up high and we are fine." "The final supply cache is on the other side of that ridge," Dorval pointed out. His voice was steadier now, the initial panic fading. "But there is a new chasm between us and it. My sensors show it is 40 meters across." Ryan walked to the edge of the newly formed chasm and looked down. The gap was deep, maybe 60 or 70 meters to the bottom where more gas was pooling. The other side was clearly visible. So close but impossible to jump. "We need rope," he said simply. "The simulation did not provide climbing rope in the supply caches," Shelvar said, checking her inventory desperately. "We have cord for equipment but nothing rated for body weight across that distance." Tom was already pulling cord from multiple packs. "We braid it. 3 strands twisted together will hold weight. Did this all the time on my uncle's farm." Katie joined him, her fingers working quickly to weave the cords together. "We will need an anchor point on both sides. Something solid that will not move." Velnik stepped forward. "My armor can serve as an anchor. I weigh enough that I will not be pulled." "You would stay on this side?" Ryan asked. "Someone must," the young Crother said. His voice carried more confidence than it had 2 days ago. "And my armor makes me the best choice." They spent 2 hours preparing. Tom taught the aliens how to braid cord properly, how to test the strength, how to tie knots that would hold under stress. Katie identified the best anchor points on both sides. Ryan calculated the angles and tension needed to make the crossing safe. Dorval watched the humans work with something like awe. "You have done this before?" he said. It was not a question. "Different versions," Katie replied. She was testing a knot, pulling hard to ensure it would not slip. "Crossed rivers with rope lines. Set up equipment in mountains. The principles are the same." "On my world we would call for technological solutions," Dorval said. "Bridge builders. Hover platforms. We would not think to use primitive methods." "Primitive methods work," Tom pointed out. "Humans have been using rope for thousands of years. It works." The braided line stretched across the chasm, anchored on their side to a rock formation and on the far side to a sturdy crystalline outcrop. Ryan went first, demonstrating the technique. He clipped a makeshift harness to the line and moved hand over hand, his legs wrapped around the rope for stability. It took him 3 minutes to cross. Once on the other side he tested the anchor again and signaled back. "Solid. Come one at a time." Shelvar went next. Her Quarren physiology was not built for this kind of physical effort, but Katie had shown her how to move efficiently, how to rest by hanging from the harness rather than fighting to hold herself up. She made it across in 5 minutes, exhausted but safe. The other students crossed one by one. Dorval came last, his armored weight putting enormous stress on the rope system. The braided cord creaked and stretched but held. When he reached the other side he touched the rope with something like reverence. "Your species builds with simple tools and they are strong," he said. "Because we have to," Ryan said. "Earth does not give us easy solutions. We make our own." The group moved toward the final supply cache. The ground continued shaking periodically, small aftershocks that made walking difficult. Gas vents opened randomly, forcing them to detour around toxic clouds. The temperature had swung back to extreme heat, pushing 58 degrees Celsius. But they moved as a unit now. When Shelvar struggled in the heat, Dorval's armored body provided shade. When the Crother's joints stiffened from exertion, the Quarren shared their electrolyte supplements. When everyone's energy flagged, the humans taught them how to pace themselves, how to rest while still moving forward, how to push through discomfort without causing injury. A massive aftershock hit when they were a kilometer from the cache. A cliff face collapsed to their right, sending debris tumbling down. Most students froze, but Tom was already moving. "Away from the cliff," he shouted. "Toward open ground." They ran together, reaching safety as rocks crashed down where they had been standing seconds before. Katie counted heads immediately, making sure everyone had made it. All 8 students accounted for. "That was close," Velnik said, his voice shaking. "But we made it," Ryan pointed out. "We stay together, we keep moving, we adapt. That is how you survive." The final supply cache sat in a reinforced shelter that had survived the earthquakes intact. Inside were the materials they needed for the last phase, along with medical supplies and fresh water. They took what they needed and rested for 20 minutes. Shelvar sat next to Katie, her breathing apparatus working hard. "My species almost never experiences natural disasters," she said quietly. "Our world is stable. Predictable. This simulation is the first time I have felt truly in danger." "And you survived it," Katie said. "You learned. That is the point." "I learned from you," Shelvar corrected. "All of us did. Without the humans teaching us, most of us would have withdrawn by now." Katie shrugged uncomfortably. "We just showed you what we know. You did the actual surviving." Dorval approached with the navigation data. The extraction point was 12 kilometers northeast. They had 18 hours to reach it. Under normal circumstances, that would be an easy walk. But the simulation was not offering normal circumstances. The terrain was fractured, gas vents dotted the route, and the predators were still active in the zone. "We move together," Ryan said. It was not a suggestion. "Same formation as yesterday. Humans spread out in the group so we can react quickly to any threat. Everyone watches everyone else. No one gets left behind." "No one gets left behind," Velnix repeated. The phrase had become something of a motto for their group. They began the final trek. The simulation threw everything it had at them. More aftershocks. A predator attack that they deflected using the noise and number strategy. A toxic gas cloud that they navigated around using wind direction. A temperature spike that they endured by moving during the slightly cooler periods and resting in shade when possible. But they moved together. When one student struggled, others helped. When danger appeared, they reacted as a coordinated unit. The humans taught, and the aliens learned, and somehow 8 students who should have been competitors became something else entirely. Professor Thalnix watched from the control center, his 8 limbs moving in patterns of confusion and fascination. The simulation was performing perfectly. Every hazard was activating as programmed. The difficulty was exactly as designed. But the humans had transformed the test. They had taken an individual survival examination and turned it into a collective exercise. They had shared knowledge that most species would have hoarded as competitive advantage. They had helped students from species they had never met before, for no reason except that help was needed. And it was working. 8 students were approaching the extraction point together. 0 withdrawals from this group since the predators were released. The success rate was unprecedented. "They are teaching survival," his assistant observed, reviewing the data streams. "No," Professor Thalnix corrected. "They are teaching something deeper. They are teaching that survival is not a solitary achievement. For humans, survival is collective. It is shared. It is a skill you pass to others because you understand that today you are strong, but tomorrow you might be weak, and you will need those others to help you in return." The assistant's translator hummed with confusion. "That is not efficient. That is not competitive." "No," the professor agreed. "But perhaps that is why humans survived their death world when species with greater individual strength might not have. They did not survive alone. They survived together." On the simulation feed, 8 students reached a ridge overlooking the extraction point. They were exhausted, filthy, and pushed to their limits. But they were together and they were smiling. The extraction point lay in a valley below them, marked by bright illumination that was visible even through the morning haze. Ryan checked his display. They had 11 hours remaining on the 72-hour countdown. The distance was only 4 kilometers. Under normal circumstances, that would be an easy walk. But the simulation had one final challenge waiting. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, moving fast. Within minutes, wind began whipping across the ridge. Rain started falling, cold and heavy. Visibility dropped to barely 20 meters. The temperature plummeted from 40 degrees to 15 in less than 10 minutes. Katie watched the storm approach and laughed. She actually laughed. Of course. One last weather system. "This is not funny," Shelvar said, her translator barely audible over the wind. "My sensors show wind speeds approaching 80 kilometers per hour. The rain is affecting my breathing apparatus filters." "It is just a storm," Tom said, but his tone was reassuring rather than dismissive. "We have been through worse the past 2 days. This is just weather." Ryan was already organizing the group into a line formation. "We link together with cord. Everyone holds the line. If someone falls or gets separated, we all feel it immediately. Move slowly. No rushing." Dorval helped distribute the remaining cord between students. His armored hands worked carefully, tying secure knots. 3 days ago, he would have questioned why they needed physical tethers when everyone had electronic tracking. Now he understood that technology could fail, but a rope was simple and reliable. They descended into the storm as a connected unit. The wind pushed against them, trying to separate them. The rain made every surface slippery. Visibility was terrible. But they moved together, each student responsible for the person in front and behind them. Velnix slipped on wet rock halfway down the slope. The cord went taut immediately. Both Dorval behind him and Katie in front felt the pull. They stopped, braced themselves, and held the line until Velnix regained his footing. "Thank you," the young Crother said, his voice shaken. "That is what the line is for," Katie replied simply. The storm raged around them for another hour. Lightning flashed in the distance. Thunder rolled across the valley. The simulation was giving them every reason to panic, to activate emergency beacons, to give up when they were so close to success. But they kept moving. Step by careful step, helping each other across difficult terrain, warning each other about obstacles, sharing the burden of the journey. When they finally emerged from the storm into the clear zone around the extraction point, all 8 students were still connected by the cord. They were soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud. But they were together. The extraction beacon pulsed with bright light. They had made it. Ryan began untying the knots that connected them, his cold fingers working slowly. Everyone okay? Any injuries? They checked themselves and each other. Minor scrapes and bruises. Sore muscles. Extreme fatigue. But nothing serious. Nothing that required medical evacuation. Shelvar's 6 eyes focused on Ryan with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. We would not have made it without you. Without all 3 humans. You know this is true. You made it because you did not give up, Ryan said. We just showed you some techniques. No, Dorval interrupted. His voice was firm. The Koran speaks truth. Without human knowledge, most of us would have withdrawn on the first day. The cold alone would have eliminated me. The predators would have eliminated Velnix. The chasm would have stopped us all. Tom looked embarrassed. We just grew up learning this stuff. It is normal for us. That is the point, Velnix said quietly. What is normal for you is extraordinary for us. Your planet made you this way. It forced your species to become experts at survival or die. And then you chose to teach us instead of leaving us behind. Katie opened her mouth to respond but stopped. She realized they were right. The past 3 days had been routine for the humans because Earth had taught them these lessons from childhood. But for species from gentler worlds, this had been an education in things they had never needed to know. The extraction light intensified. Professor Thalnix materialized in front of them, his holographic form sharp and clear. His 8 limbs moved in patterns they had learned meant deep emotion. 8 students, he said. His voice carried weight. You have completed the simulation. But more remarkably, you completed it as a unit. 0 withdrawals from your group since the second morning. This has never happened in the 40 cycles I have taught this course. He turned to address the humans specifically. Ryan Foster. Katie Mills. Tom Bradley. You 3 achieved perfect scores on all survival metrics. You located all caches, reached extraction with time remaining, and demonstrated mastery of extreme environment navigation. But those accomplishments are secondary to what you actually achieved here. Ryan exchanged glances with Katie and Tom. They looked confused. Professor Thalnix continued. You transformed an individual assessment into a collective success. You taught survival techniques to species who had no framework for understanding Deathworld conditions. You created cooperation where the simulation was designed to create competition. The professor's hologram shifted to show data streams and analysis. I have studied survival behavior for my entire career. I designed this simulation based on the assumption that survival is primarily about individual adaptation, specialized biology, evolved advantages, species-specific resilience. He gestured toward the group of 8 students. You proved that assumption incomplete. Human survival is not just about individual toughness. It is about transmitting knowledge, building community, refusing to succeed alone when you could succeed together. Shelvar spoke up, her translator steady and clear. Professor, permission to speak? Granted. The humans did not just teach us survival techniques, she said. They taught us a philosophy. On my world, we have a saying that translates roughly as, the individual thread is easily broken, but woven together, threads become unbreakable. I thought I understood this saying. But humans live it. They do not just believe in cooperation. They practice it instinctively, even with strangers, even during competitive assessment. Dorval added his voice. My species values strength and individual achievement above all else. We see competition as honorable. But I watched the humans choose collective success over personal advantage repeatedly. They shared resources. They taught skills. They helped the weakest among us instead of leaving them behind to improve their own speed. This is not weakness. This is a different kind of strength. Professor Thalnix's limbs moved in acknowledgement. You understand correctly. I have been reviewing data from Earth studies. Humans evolved on a Class 12 death world with hundreds of predator species, extreme weather variations, geological instability, and disease pressures that would have eliminated most species. But humans survived not through armor or natural weapons or environmental specialization. They survived through cooperation, knowledge transmission, and social bonds. He turned back to the humans. Your species survived Earth by making survival a shared responsibility. You built cultures around teaching the young, protecting the weak, and helping each other through disasters. This is not just survival strategy. This is civilization itself, built on the foundation of collective resilience. Katie shifted uncomfortably. We really just did what seemed natural. Exactly, the professor said. What seems natural to Deathworlders is revolutionary to the rest of the galaxy. Your instincts are shaped by thousands of generations surviving conditions most species never face. The extraction completed. They materialized in the Academy's medical bay, where staff immediately began checking everyone's condition. Word had already spread about the unprecedented completion rate. Students and faculty crowded the observation areas, watching the group emerge. Over the next days, the story spread across the Academy. 8 students completing together. Humans teaching aliens to survive Deathworld conditions. A competitive examination transformed into cooperative achievement. Professor Thalnix called a faculty meeting 2 weeks later. His presentation showed detailed analysis of the simulation data, human teaching methods, and the measurable improvement in alien student survival capabilities after receiving human instruction. I propose we redesign Extreme Survival 101, he announced. Not to make it easier, but to incorporate human survival philosophy into the curriculum. Cooperation should be encouraged, not discouraged. Knowledge sharing should be rewarded, not penalized. We should teach that survival is collective achievement, not individual competition. The proposal passed with overwhelming support. Ryan, Katie, and Tom received the highest honors in their graduating class. But more importantly, they received requests from dozens of species wanting to learn human survival techniques. Velnix returned to his home colony and began teaching what he had learned. Shelvar wrote a paper on cooperative survival strategies that became required reading in xenobiology courses. Dorval challenged his own species' competitive traditions and started advocating for collective training methods. 6 months after the simulation, Ryan received a message. It was from a research station on the edge of Corin space. They had experienced a natural disaster, an unexpected seismic event that damaged their facilities. But using techniques they had learned from studying the human survival course data, they had evacuated everyone safely. 0 casualties. The message thanked him for teaching the galaxy that survival was not about being strong enough to endure alone. It was about being wise enough to endure together. Ryan showed the message to Katie and Tom in the Academy cafeteria. They sat in their usual spot, the same place they had sat the day before the simulation began. We started something, Tom said, reading the message. We just went camping, Katie replied. But she was smiling. Ryan leaned back in his chair. The galaxy thought Earth made us tough. But that is not the real lesson. Earth made us survivors. And survivors do not leave people behind. Across the galaxy, survival courses began changing. Competition gave way to cooperation. Individual metrics became secondary to group success. Species from stable, gentle worlds learned from the Deathworlders who had survived Earth's brutality by refusing to survive alone. Professor Thalnix published his final paper on the subject 3 years later. The title was simple but profound. Deathworld Evolution and the Social Foundation of Survival, What Humanity Teaches the Galaxy. The abstract's final line became famous across academic circles. They did not survive Earth because they were stronger than Earth's dangers. They survived because they were stronger together than any danger alone. This is the true lesson of Deathworld evolution. In a small section of the Academy archives, the simulation data from that 3-day examination remained preserved. Future students would study it, analyzing the decisions made, the techniques taught, the cooperation demonstrated. But the real lesson was simpler than any analysis could capture. 8 students from different worlds, different biologies, different cultures had walked through conditions designed to break them. And they had walked through together, learning that survival was not a competition to win but a responsibility to share. That was the day the galaxy learned what Earth had known for millennia. The strongest thread is not the one that stands alone. It is the one woven together with others.